Volunteering New Zealand is the peak body for volunteering in New Zealand, obviously, similar to the role of Volunteering Australia. And our role is to encourage volunteers and volunteering in all its form. We were established in 2001, which was one of the first international year of the volunteer, and noting that there's one going to be next year for 2026. We have 100 national members, including 17 amazing regional volunteer centres. Underneath all of our actual members are then around 10,000 community organisations under them. So our members have a lot of members. So we work on behalf of our network of members and other stakeholders and, of course, volunteers. So in terms of the best practice guidelines, they reflect that what we know is that volunteering requires leadership, and leaders of volunteers need the right tools to do their job. And so what part of our work focuses on providing tools and resources for leaders of volunteers. And by doing that, we collectively enable an environment where volunteering can thrive and volunteers can thrive. The Volunteering New Zealand original best practice guidelines were created in 2011, and they were possibly one of the world's first sets of guidelines or guidance to support volunteer involvement. They were presented as a paper-based tool in a workbook that you ran through as a team from start to finish, and they were not digitized. So we, a couple of years ago, really identified that there was an opportunity to review these and update them. And we launched into a year-long review of them. And I just wanted to note that over 300 people and organisations contributed to the creation of these guidelines. So just a little bit of context about them. Instead of an organisational need focus, our refreshed guidelines now centre the volunteer at the heart of the guidelines. This was achieved by flipping the model of the guidelines to be focused around a volunteer lifecycle framework. And through that, we identified 7 key areas relevant to a step on the life cycle of a volunteer as it travels through its relationship with an organisation. And I would also point out we did focus on creating a resource that we thought would help predominantly smaller organisations for volunteer involvement, because that is, we're coming out of COVID, we knew it was our smaller voluntary organisations across the country that had been hit the hardest. One of the first pieces of feedback we received from a volunteer leader who attended first regional training on the BPGs delivered by a regional volunteer centre. And they said what they loved about the guidelines was that they could use these internally to have discussions with their senior leadership team about volunteering program needs, and that they could reference something that was external, that they valued that it was by us, the sector peak body. But I would like to highlight that we drew on significant sector expertise, both from volunteer managers and volunteers, to create these. They were co-designed. We ran a co-design workshop process, one for each of the 7 areas of the best practice guidelines. We used Mural, an online tool co-design platform, and we hosted sessions for each of the practice areas with over 60 people from a wide-ranging range of community organisations participating. The process generated thousands of digital post-it notes, nearly 13,000 words and 54 pages of content. So when we use best practice guidelines for advocacy or to make change, we can do so knowing that the guidelines are synthesized from the wisdom of many and from your peers. Um, just sort of focusing now on the actual guidelines themselves. You can only see pieces, 6 of the areas here, just because of the way it sits out on the screen. They're designed to be highly accessible. They're on our website. They're open access and free. And just to also point out, they're framed as guidance on how you could do things, not what you should, and include principles and examples. We have produced a resource hub with the guidelines and with guidelines and templates to support this as well. I will keep moving along so I don't run out of time, but each section includes key principles, what volunteers need, what good practice could look like, and actions organisations could take. We design them so you can just dip in and find something that might help you right then and there, and you don't have to assess yourself or consider all 7 at once. So the guidelines are for all sorts of people and being used by all sorts of organisations and people. The So community organisations, small, large, are using them as well. Volunteer managers, obviously leaders, funders and donors, and volunteers themselves. So I just, there are 7 practice areas, and I just wanted to, I'm not going to go into each of the practice areas in detail, but I wanted to highlight the 7th area, which is exiting volunteers. And I know, so we kind of focus on this when I'm talking about it. I focus on this when I'm talking about it because one of the things we experienced, particularly post-COVID or in the COVID environment, we were getting a lot of calls where things had gone wrong at that exit stage. And when we dug down into that, it really surfaced that some of the challenges around the exit process uh, resulted because we had missed some good practice at the start. Unclear role descriptions, unclear or no policies on conduct, exiting process, retiring volunteers, etc., and lack of investment and training into growing volunteers. Things like that were surfacing. So we found we were really focused on having and celebrating the exit part of the process within these guidelines. Obviously, volunteering is a choice. So this gives you a little snapshot of what it looks like if you were to jump into our online guidelines. I'm not putting them all up there. So yeah, volunteering is a choice. We learn and grow from our exiting experience, and we should be aiming to create respectful and volunteer-centered process for volunteers leaving organisations. I have come across in my time some people who worry about volunteers leaving and really wanting them to stay in it. But I think we know that volunteering is a choice, and actually, if our volunteers come to us and learn and grow and leave, that's actually a really great outcome for us and for them. I also think it's important for succession planning that we are planning for exiting and growth of volunteers moving on or moving up into different roles, because I think people are more likely to put up their hands if they see volunteers moving through organisations. I know a lot of people find it hard to find treasurers and sometimes board members, and often these people are sitting in these roles for quite a long time because they're not having don't have people stepping into those roles. So it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, that it looks like you can't be replaced, therefore you might not put your hand up to do it. So I think it's a challenge for all of us to, in leadership roles, volunteering leadership roles, is to look at our succession planning and do we make it clear that we're actually happy for our volunteers to grow and move on, and and the meaning, like a meaningful exit for volunteers is really important, and it's a positive one as well, in terms of the fact that volunteers, we know, are our advocates in our communities, even beyond when they are with us. And volunteers are more likely to donate to our organisations as well. So I think also to highlight part of the focus of the best practice guidelines from our perspective is about the relational aspect between the volunteer and the organisation, and that relationships grow and change, and they go on in different ways, even if they're not volunteering with us anymore. There's still a relational aspect to that. So, how are they used? I've mentioned that they have been used as a tool for advocacy, opportunities for volunteer managers to use them to support requests for resourcing and support for volunteer programs, and to advocate for a more strategic volunteer engagement approach rather than just a program-based approach. Training has been, internal training has been designed around them. It's a way of informing people about key processes for volunteers, training people who don't typically work with volunteers. Something that became apparent after we released them to me was that they're actually also a great tool for new and young volunteers who can use them as a tool to know what to expect when they volunteer. So empowering them in their journey as a volunteer. Reviewing and making internal operational activities better for volunteers. Some organisations have been using it as an assessment tool from an organisation to review its internal processes, for reviewing their policies. I have had some discussions with one large national organisation which is using them to guide development for new technology solutions that support volunteers, which I was really excited to hear about. What I'm going to do next is just take you through some real-life case studies from organisations that have used BPGs in different ways, and I've tried to focus on a few different sizes and sorts of organisations. So, Food for Love, Wanaka. It's an example of a small local-based volunteer program using the BPGs as a starting point to review its processes, to evolve their program for the benefit of their volunteers. They highlight the guidance and ideas elements of the BPGs and the opportunity to make small and incremental changes. And so I guess we don't have to go and do a massive review and change everything. We can just make some small things better, one at a time. Food for Love is a volunteer-driven home-cooked meal service dedicated to supporting people during challenging times. Volunteers can get involved in cooking, delivering, fundraising, or behind-the-scenes support, and the organisation is growing fast to meet increasing need with strong community backing. It's a small team, 3 staff, 170 volunteers. Our General Manager Jodie Stewart was introduced to our best practice guidelines when she participated in our mentoring program for leaders and volunteers. And as you can see there, she's found it a really valuable resource. She used it to look at all of their processes to see what could be evolved and what they could do better, incrementally making changes and biting off small changes. They got quite a lot of notes here of what they have done, which I can make available in more detail afterwards. Just to summarise, they took the approach of what can we do to make things better, as I've said, through which they identified, for example, that they're home cooks. So their process is to cook in home and then deliver. Their home cooks were feeling disconnected from the organisation, so they implemented a volunteer lounge, a space for volunteers to come in and be part of the operational teams on Mondays. They reviewed role descriptions. Previously, they had not documented a lot of those, so they went in and actually clarified role descriptions and expectations, making it easier for themselves and for volunteers to know what was expected. This also helped with the process for when they couldn't quite match prospective volunteer to available roles, and gave them a process for dealing with that situation. So that's kind of like dealing with exiting issues that could have arisen later if you put someone into the wrong role or didn't have the right role for them, but took them on anyway, but couldn't keep them happy with the opportunities that we were offered. And they actually did a whole pile of guidance for their volunteers in terms of providing them with what they need when they volunteered. They had a lot of fundraising volunteers, and they gave them the key messages, the how to deal with tricky conversations, a whole pile of resources to make volunteering easy. And I think to sum it up, they essentially, Jodie, we've done an online interview with her. She says investing in your volunteer strategy is really important, and your relationships, and doing that and your organisation will thrive. And she strongly urged people to create time and space to focus on volunteers, which she also acknowledged was quite hard in an environment where we're resource depleted. We're busy, we're trying to do everything all at once. But yeah, it gave her so the best practice guidelines gave her a tool to spend time thinking about how they can make volunteering better for their volunteers. The Driving Change Network. So I apologise, these are all obviously New Zealand examples for our Australian friends. But the Driving Change Network provides a smaller illustration on how the BPGs can be useful in emergent programs and collaborations. Driver licensing challenges in New Zealand present barriers to participation in a wide range of activities that enable and improve outcomes for the driver. For context, this is a network of 500 organisations working to create systems level change within community to move driver education and training to a more accessible and practical place. So they came across the BPGs in late 2023, just as they were working towards developing a national mentor guide for community-based driver programs across New Zealand. And they wanted to create a tool for all of those organisations and people working in community driver programs that were able to be used by them to set up programs and run programs that were volunteer enabled. And obviously it included a pathway for recruitment, retention and recognition. And essentially the guidelines were able to be used although they'd already started on the project in that piece of work I just mentioned, they were able to take the guidelines and audit and do a review to see what was missing and how they could improve them. They also were able to use the guidelines as a tool to remotely support new staff members around the country setting up driving programs who didn't necessarily have any volunteer management experience, and it gave them a pathway, opportunity for that person to identify gaps when they're setting up their own new program. So New Zealand Field Days is a massive agricultural event in New Zealand. I'm sure there are similar things in Australia. New Zealand Field Days is a really well-established volunteer national organisation, but running predominantly one massive event each year. So they already had some really great volunteer programs and practices, and they were actually actively participate. Sorry, just got back from a really long holiday, so forgive me if I'm not getting my words out properly. So Field Days National Volunteer Manager was an active participant in helping design the BPGs themselves. So Beth Jobin was part of the co-design process and brought some of her expertise to the process. But even a big organisation with really great practices has taken the opportunity to review their practices in line with and against the best practice guidelines. And, there's always things that we could pick up and change and do better. So they've used it in the recruitment and onboarding space. They've introduced new volunteer orientation sessions. They've worked on to give volunteers a sense of belonging, buddies to support them, and also pre-event briefings before the field days event happens. Um, and their working to make sure their volunteers feel informed and welcome. They've done lots of stuff in the recognition space and the training space as well. Just conscious of time. In terms of the training focus, that is one of the areas of the best practice guidelines. They've been developing a more robust volunteer training program tailored to individuals. And the goal of that is to support skills and confidence and personal growth of the volunteers, which I think is part of that journey we all want to see our volunteers going on. And what they've found is that they've got not necessarily through focusing on the best practice guidelines, but they are seeing a real increase in the diversity of their volunteers. And now other organisations are reaching out to field days as a model for inclusion practices. So, and they're also using them to review internal practices. I'll just pause there and just see if there's anything that you, Andy, if there's anything jumping out in terms of the chat, or if you're happy for me to keep going.
No,
No pressure.
People seem to be pretty satisfied at the moment. There's a bit of kudos coming through, just saying, well done. These guidelines are excellent because they're transferable and relatable across borders. The only question we've had so far was just asking, how the New Zealand guidelines, how do they equate to the Australian national standards? Are they kind of the same kind of document across different countries and so forth? So that's it so far.
I can answer that question very briefly. And I did, last year we did the same session, but we did a much deeper introduction to the process of creating the best practice guidelines. And one of the things we spent a lot of time researching what had changed, and there were a lot of different guidelines that had come out globally from between our 2011 ones and our 2023 ones. So we definitely looked, I had a very complex table matrix cross-checking where we were going. We had our old guidelines, we looked at the volunteering ones, Scottish ones, English ones, a few, and some stuff from Canada, and just to make sure that we weren't missing out on anything really important. I think where the national guidelines for Australia differ is that they have a bit more of a focus on the advocacy element of volunteer leadership probably at a higher skill level than where this is aimed at. But I don't think we miss advocacy in the wider context of these. Great question, because that's the question I asked myself as we went through the project.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So I've got a couple. Another example to share with you. Now, I must disclose I'm on the board of Ballyful, so I would hope to be able to share good practice from Ballyful. I've been on the board since 2018, and it's been such a privilege. In a similar sense to Food for Love, Ballyful is a national, so where Food for Love is a small local organisation doing food support to families. Ballyful is a national volunteer-led charity that also delivers free meals, but the focus is to families with babies and young children without a support network, with 25 branches across the country, all run by local volunteers. In 2024, Ballyful volunteers delivered over 34,000 meals to more than 6,000 whānau families, and we've been increasing our delivery into families with babies in NICU and SCIBU, which is intensive care units for babies. So And you can see a quote here from Lizzie Benyon, supporter care administrator, who does an amazing job. But the focus for Ballyful has been, they've been established for quite a while, 15 years, and quite good practices already, but always seeing the opportunity to improve and develop further, and highlighting the fact that volunteer retention is increasingly challenging and volunteer recruitment is increasingly challenging in New Zealand. We're seeing a shift of people giving their time more to informal volunteering than organisations. So it's a really, whatever we can do to make the process better, quicker, smarter, more effective for our volunteers, the better experience they're going to have and the more likely they are to stay. And that's sort of part of the motivation for Bellyful. I just wanted to focus on also the fact that in addition, so Bellyful New Zealand has embraced best practice framework, and so recruitment, onboarding, feedback, and recognition. They're doing lots of good stuff. But Lizzie, we've done an interview with Lizzie recently, and she notes that it's particularly important that the guidelines are now backed at all levels, from board to our CE, and integrating. They're working to integrate them across everything they do. So this slide may look like way too many words on a screen. But I'll just highlight to you number one. So there's a people focus. People are the most important part of Ballyful. 700 volunteers, four or five people in the national office supporting those volunteers. So you can see under number one that they actually surfacing in the strategic plan, bringing the best practice guidelines to life. So that's a really great example of how we can all step up where and how we see and view and recognise volunteers. And if we're doing it at our strategic plan level, then we're really in a good space. In creating this iteration of the strategic plan, there was a very significant engagement with the whole volunteer base into creating and refreshing this plan. And underpinning that focus on people is a focus on training and support. So Ballyful has recently launched a volunteer development program, including leadership training, wellbeing tools, and practical skills to I guess, nourish and support our volunteers. And the results of this they are seeing is more engaged and involved Ballyful leaders, and volunteers being involved in shaping the strategic direction of the organisation, stronger relationships across the organisation, and a culture of support. And I think also importantly, a willingness to try new things. We can often sometimes be stuck in the way we're doing things and not have the time or resources to innovate. But trying new things is really, especially ones that are suggested or provided to us by our volunteer base, it's a really great thing to try out. So Ballyful is a member organisation of Volunteering New Zealand, so is New Zealand Field Days. So is English Language Partners, and this is a slide just briefly about them. And it's it's a little bit of a slight segue from the BPGs, but builds on what I just talked about in relation to Ballyful. So they teach English for work and everyday life to new Kiwis, and the result of that is they enable their learners to participate and live independent lives after they've come to New Zealand. So it's a large national organisation. Now, the thing I really wanted to show you was that they've just released their strategy 2030. I know they are doing some stuff around best practice guidelines, but I really wanted to highlight that in the enablers, they've actually surfaced that volunteers are a key enabler for them to achieve their strategy 2030. And I think these are really important things that I would, get really excited about when I see them. So I wanted to share that with the audience. So yeah, just in terms of I think I kind of stole volunteering requires leadership from the Volunteering Australia National Strategy for Volunteering. Really resonates with us here, and that volunteering requires leadership, and leaders of volunteers need the right tools to do their job, and resourcing and support. And we do have a couple of last quotes about the use of the best practice guidelines. I'm really fascinated by this one from Chris Atkin. When you're a volunteer service within a professional organisation. So that's one of our large hospitals or district health boards. The volunteer best practice guidelines give you permission to refer to best practice that helps clinical staff to understand that volunteer service isn't some kind of amateur hour. I wouldn't use this word. We too have professional guidelines. And Leon Hartnett, who is quoted below, is actually now a volunteering New Zealand board member. I think that's because he loved the best practice guidelines so much. But I remember him telling me about how they took the best practice guidelines, and essentially they have a regular national meeting with all of their volunteer leaders throughout the country. So they come together and they basically just use it as a benchmarking tool to see who feels how they're doing in their areas, and where they might want to focus and where they can share what they're doing really well with each other. So it's a useful tool for where the strengths are and where the areas of growth are. So I was pretty excited about that quote as well. Okay, so I actually surprised myself when I realised actually it's been over 2 years since we released the guidelines, and we have been quite busy since then. One of the things, so I'm just going to talk about some of the things that we've done very briefly since we released them. So we did a survey of volunteer leaders and managers when we created them in 23. So we had a survey in 22, and then we repeated the survey in 2024. And we learned so much through the actual 1 year project that inspired and fed into a lot of the ideas that we've been building on since then. But our 2022 survey identified limited resourcing and investment into volunteer leaders, managers, training and professional development. What wouldn't surprise many of us, we were quite flabbergasted at the percentage of people receiving no training. Like over 50% of people responding to the survey had received no training or professional development in the previous year. We were pleased when we reran our 2024 survey to find that volunteer managers and leaders had indicated showing more support through a variety of ways, including stuff from our website, but also through their own professional networks. So training had gone up, and so there's a bit of an incremental change. But some of the things we did from 23 to now is we offered a peer-to-peer program. We've done trainings and workshops based on the BPGs, some of them free and online and low cost. We obviously run an annual volunteering leadership hui. We would love anyone from Australia who wants to come to Auckland on the 9th and 10th of October and have a long weekend here and come to our hui. Andy's coming. We'd warmly welcome you to join us. We're maintaining, obviously, our free online tools and resource hub for the best practice guidelines. Anyone can use them. So I'll just quickly take you through a couple of these things. We were quite compelled by what we learned through the best practice guidelines process and also our surveying. So we actually spent some time creating a theory of change for investing into volunteer management. And it's just a snapshot. And when the slides are distributed by Paula from Better Impact, there'll be links in the slides to these resources that I'm showing you now. The theory of change essentially, basically, there's a really strong and direct case between investing in volunteer managers and their training, and in volunteers having better better well-being and better experiences of volunteering. And that has obviously an impact on organisations achieving their community impact. So investing in volunteer management is a vital element of good volunteer programs. And there's a whole pile of reasons we did this, but we've used it for our own funding applications. But essentially, we've released this as a tool or document on our resource hub, and we warmly welcome you to take it, use it, make it better, and use it in your own funding application processes. I think you can take this and apply it to an organisation. And if anyone's got other examples of such a thing, I would love them to be shared with us as well. So we've started delivering lots of different versions of best practice guideline training. So we use that theory of change to get some funding to deliver low-cost regional one-day workshops. If you're based in Nelson or Christchurch, we warmly welcome you to attend one of those with us. In addition to those one-day workshops, we've also created two-hour and 4-hour workshops, and they're really focused on not telling you what to do, but introducing the framework of the best practice guidelines, but then inviting participants to share their knowledge with each other as a way of trying to break down those silos and acknowledging that there is really awesome expertise out there, but we're often siloed in our roles, we're quite busy, and we may not receive a lot of information about how to do our job in any other form. And all of our workshops are getting really highly rated results. So we've increased the number of trainings that we've done and also still getting good results. So that really tells us that what we're doing is needed, we're excited about it. So when we did one of our workshops recently, we delivered it with a local council, and it was a sort of shorter 3-hour version, and it was for very small groups working in the conservation space. What we learned from that was that we could even make our guidance even more concise. So there is this is an example of the kind of resource that sits in the resource hub behind the volunteer best practice guidelines. So link in the slides for you if you'd like to access that, also available on our website. And it's just a 2-page summary, making it very accessible for smaller organisations. Highlighting that we do have an awesome resource hub sitting behind the best practice guidelines. Warmly welcome you to have a look at that. Obviously, probably not able to compete with the Volunteering Australia one. Ours is targeted at basic, simple resources, trying to not clutter it up with too much information for people who may be new or in the 3 to 5 year learning space of their role as a volunteer manager. We also did a range of we've done 1-hour sessions, free and online, and we will do them again this year. We recorded them as we went. We didn't release the actual full videos back to participants because there was a lot of sharing and discussions, and we didn't want to, that would be too boring to share with everybody, but also just to protect that space of sharing privately. But we did create 7 videos of each of the 7 areas, which are literally, you're the first people to see this externally. We just released them a couple of days ago on our website, and they are in on our website on our YouTube channel as a playlist. So there'll be a link to that in the slides as well. I'm going to hurry up and leave some time for questions. Just highlighting one of the really important things we've done is to produce a volunteer managers mentoring program. It's taken us a couple of years to be able to set that up and get that in our BAU operational space. We got some extra funding to start it off, but now we're able to deliver it. And it's also been hugely successful in terms of results, but it's, one of the things we wanted to do is to focus on volunteer managers, but also help create networks and connections for our members and other stakeholders, because that web of connectivity is really important, I think, for volunteer leaders and managers, and something that we can do as a connecting organisation. And if anyone, it's also something that's big organisations could actually do within their, like if you're a St. John or a Red Cross, you could probably run something like that within your own organisation to support your volunteer managers.